You're listening to Tabletop Arcanum, a podcast dedicated to learning and exploring the hobby of tabletop gaming. Your hosts are Justin Taylor and Richard Geese, so sit back and relax as we talk, discuss, and joke our way through the hobby we love so much. Disclaimer. We asked the wizard Mordecai to add a humorous disclaimer for this book. We received this response. The day I start writing fibless disclaimers for game manuals is the day I retire from wizardry and abandon all self-respect. Mordecai's rival, Wizard Tasha, apparently intercepted our request and sent us this note. Mordecai lost his sense of humor somewhere between the city of Greyhawk and the astral plane. Keep your chins up, my dearest ones. The multiverse is filled with horrors, many of which are detailed in this book. Marshal your laughter and a few good spells. If we're going to be devoured, better face the darkness with a smile. Welcome to Tabletop Arcanum. This is Justin, and I am bringing you a review of Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Mordecai Presents The Monsters of the Multiverse. This is a newest addition to the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition books, and is debuting in the Rules Expansion gift set, will be later available to purchase on its own separately. The gift set itself does include Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, as well as a new DM screen for you and a new book. So it does have a lot of it, and let's dive in to some first impressions. So I went into this one a little bit blind, not knowing that it was going to be a new book, not exactly sure what they were going to do with it. It was going to portray PC races and monsters, as well as using the newest format of presenting that information, so it's less rigid if you wanted to use those rules and have more flexibility in the use of your character choices. The gift set itself is very nice. It's very much like the core rulebook gift set that you can pick up as well, and makes a great launching point for yourself to the next stages for D&D. Let's talk about what the book is and isn't before we start talking about what it is good for. Now, this is about 25% player races and about 75% monsters. So it's partially a player's secondary resource, and it's mostly a secondary monsters manual. Most of the content in this book has been printed elsewhere. You have races from Eberron showing up, Volo's Guide to Monster races getting cleaned up and put into this volume. So really, it's a collection of all the other books that have added 1, 2, 3 different options here and there. Likewise, most of the monsters are in the similar vein. They are just adding a little bit of a cleanup on some of the mechanics, but for the most part are relatively left alone and reprinted into a single volume. If you're a DM who likes their physical books and doesn't necessarily use D&D Beyond or other online resources, this is a volume that makes your traveling a lot easier. Let's go first on the things that this book does well and some of the highlights from it. Now, I already kind of talked about how it does collect everything, and for your traveling DM, that is a huge perk if you're not using your digital resources, which is a complete choice. Now, this book does offer a lot more options. It does put a lot of the player races into the new format, so they've tweaked some things where swim speeds and walking speeds are now matched, and there isn't a disparity between those things with the races that do that. Likewise, they uncoupled a lot of the traits, including your ability score modifiers to the races, so that you don't feel shorted by taking a race and playing a wizard when that race doesn't have an intelligence bonus, for example. All in all, it's about 33 races for players to pick between, in addition to your player's handbook, and definitely gives a larger pool of options for you in one volume, which is definitely the perk in this sense. Now, the monsters, for the most part, are all been collected from the various volumes and modules and things into this, and then some have been brought up from older editions, and a few, and I do mean only a few, have been really collected to newer material. So most of the content in this book you have seen from Volo's Guide to Monsters, Mordecai's Tome of Foes, Princess of the Apocalypse, Eberron Rising from Last War, and the Mystic Odysseys of Theros. So there is a lot of good content in this book. in that sense. Most of the art has been repurposed, but things that did not necessarily have art before now have gotten some, so there's always that as a plus. Now, some of the opportunities in this book is it may not be a book for you in a couple senses, because in short, if you've collected a lot of these books along the way, or digitally content through D&D Beyond, you already have access to most of this material. The only major difference is you may have slightly different variations of this material. Overall, it's looking to set up the next iteration of Dungeons & Dragons past 5th edition, which is not a necessarily terrible thing, and the book is completely optional, so if you're not one that's including the rules that were updated from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, uncoupling your bonuses from your racial choices, you don't necessarily need this book for that, or use the items in this book. One of the greatest things about tabletop RPGs, especially if you're looking at non-league and non-organized play, it's your table. You need to do what you want to do best at your table with your group. The one thing I found missing out of this book was a lot of lore and fluff that could have been included with the races, and has been, taking them down to about a half page of information each, removing sub-races. While you can personally flavor a lot of that, there was always fun choices to be made between the different types of Aasimar or the different type of halflings that gave you a little bit more choice and a little bit more flavor for each one. There is still a lot of history and lore between these things, so you can still find that inspiration, but not having it printed in the book makes it more of a lighter choice and more of a fill-in-the-blank questionnaire form than knowing what some of these monsters and creatures have been like. Some of it is to uncouple that the deep-rooted racism that has been throughout fantasy, and that is a good step in a good direction. Having maybe 1 to 2 paragraphs to tell me what a bugbear or a paragraph to tell me what a centaur is doesn't leave me with a lot to be inspired by. Overall, my final thoughts are on this book that you can take it or leave it depending on where you are in your D&D career. If you're still a relatively new player and are just looking at having the original box set of Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and Dungeon Master Guide, this is a great second step to expand your gameplay experience. Expanding your monster selection, expanding your rules and things with Xanathars, expanding your options with Tasha's. All of those are fantastic things, and this gift set that the Book of Monsters of the Multiverse comes in really enhances the experience. However, if you are a long-time collector and player since day one and have picked up books as you've gone through, as they've come out or along the way, the Monsters of the Multiverse offers very little other than collecting them into a single volume for yourself and giving them a fresh coat of paint. Some of that is great, but ultimately you're repurchasing most of the material you've already purchased prior and already have access to. So getting new and fresh content isn't there for you. If you fall more into the player side of things or don't use the modules that 5th edition has been offering, there is a lot that can be new to you in this book because they do use monsters from a lot of those modules and reprint them into this book, which is a very good thing because there's been some really interesting monsters introduced along the way from those campaigns. I hope that has given you a better idea if Monsters of the Multiverse is a book for you. This has been Tabletop Arcanum. Thanks for listening. Make sure to find us on our social medias. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, get those notifications so you know when we have new content coming out. As always, happy gaming. You've been listening to Tabletop Arcanum, produced by Justin Taylor. This episode is hosted by Justin Taylor. Mixing and editing by Richard Geese. Original theme by Paul Moore and Issac Gilbert. Check the description for this episode's featured background music. You can follow us on most social media platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow, and leave us a review if you would. As always, thanks for listening.